The great hall of the alien palace was silent, except for the sound of laughter. 3 tall alien sisters stood in the center, their silver skin glowing under the crystal lights, their sharp eyes fixed on one lonely human. The human stood with chains around his wrists, his head lowered, his dark hair covering his face. The sisters pointed at him and laughed, their voices echoing across the chamber. "Look at him," said the eldest sister, her tone filled with scorn. "Such a fragile body, so thin, so weak. Not even worth the metal that binds him." The second sister smirked, her long fingers tapping the floor. "Humans are nothing. They break like glass. They beg for mercy when real warriors fight. Why would anyone bring such a creature here?" The youngest sister leaned forward, her smile cruel. "This one looks like he cannot even lift a weapon. If this is the pride of Earth, then Earth must be a planet of cowards." The crowd of aliens roared with laughter, their sharp teeth flashing as they mocked the prisoner, but the human did not answer. He did not raise his voice, he only stood still, his silence more powerful than their words. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the hall opened, and the room fell quiet. The king entered, his golden armor shining brighter than the stars, his steps slow and heavy. The 3 sisters bowed, but their eyes remained proud. They were the daughters of the king, feared and admired across the galaxy. Behind the king walked his guards, strong warriors with blades made of light, yet even they lowered their heads when he passed. The king stopped in front of the human, his tall shadow covering the smaller figure. The silence in the hall grew deeper. No one dared to breathe. The sisters looked at their father with pride, waiting for him to crush the human with a single command. They expected the end to come quickly, for in their eyes, a human had no right to stand in the king's court. But the king did not give the order. Instead, his voice rumbled like thunder, calm but powerful. "Why do you mock him?" the king asked, his golden eyes fixed on his daughters. The eldest sister lifted her chin, her voice strong because he is weak. "Father, he is nothing compared to us, compared to our people." The king's gaze did not move. "And yet he stands, chained but not broken," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. The crowd murmured, unsure of his words. The sisters exchanged confused glances, but their pride held strong. The second sister laughed softly, shaking her head. "He only stands because he is too foolish to kneel. A real warrior knows when to bow." This human does not even understand his place. The king stepped closer to the prisoner, his shadow falling heavier. The human finally raised his head, his eyes calm but burning with quiet fire. For the first time, the court saw his face, not of fear, but of silent defiance. The king studied him carefully, and the corners of his mouth curved into the faintest smile. The youngest sister's voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking. "He is nothing, father. He is less than nothing. Why keep him alive when we could end this shame now?" The king turned his head slowly, his gaze piercing through his daughter. "Be careful, child," he said, his tone deep and cold. "For sometimes what looks small is greater than what looks mighty." The hall shook with whispers. The aliens did not understand. Why would the king defend a human? A creature mocked across the stars. The sisters frowned, but their pride stopped them from asking more. They only sneered again at the human, believing their father was testing him before destroying him. But the human's silence was no weakness. It was a weapon, though his body was bound. His spirit stood free, and the king could see it. The sisters could only see a frail body, but the king saw something deeper, something dangerous. The hall waited in suspense, as if the walls themselves leaned forward to hear the king's next words. The king looked once more at his daughters, then at the silent human. The air grew heavy, hearts beat faster, eyes locked on the throne. Something was about to happen. Something no one expected. The sisters, still mocking, had no idea that their laughter would soon turn into silence, and the human they despised would soon become the center of their fate. The silence in the hall did not last long when the king's voice faded. The three sisters stepped forward again, their pride burning brighter than their father's warning. They could not accept that a human, a creature they thought lower than dust, was standing before them in the great court, so they chose to strike harder with words. Cutting deeper than any blade, the eldest sister, known for her sharp tongue, moved first. She circled around the human slowly, her long silver robe trailing behind her like smoke. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, searching for weakness. "You call this thing a warrior," she said loudly, her voice echoing in the vast hall. "Look at his arms, thin like branches. Look at his skin, soft and weak." One cut would end him, the crowd chuckled, their voices joining her mockery. The second sister tilted her head, her lips curling into a cruel smile. She leaned close to the human's face, her voice low but filled with venom. "Tell me, little creature, how many battles have you fought? How many victories have you claimed? Or do humans only win when they beg for mercy?" Her words dripped like poison, and the audience laughed again, shaking the walls with their cruel joy. But the human did not answer. He only looked back at her with calm eyes. That silence made her frown, because she expected fear. She expected trembling, but she found none. Her voice grew louder, sharper. "Why do you not speak? Are you too afraid? Or do you know that your words mean nothing in this place?" The youngest sister, always the boldest, walked straight up to him, her golden eyes flashing with arrogance. She raised her hand and pushed his shoulder, testing his balance. The human stumbled slightly, but did not fall. That made her smirk even more. "See?" she cried. "He cannot even stand strong against a touch. And yet he dares to stand in the king's hall. What a shame for his kind." The three sisters laughed together now, their voices sharp as knives. They turned to the court, raising their hands as if presenting a show. "Behold," the eldest declared, "the proud human, the so-called child of earth. Weaker than a shadow, softer than sand," the second sister added. "This is why their world will never rise. This is why humans bow to every stronger race they meet." The youngest shouted, "He should crawl, not stand. He should kneel before us." Before true power, the crowd cheered, clapping their hands, stomping their feet, the noise of mockery growing like a storm. It was a theater of cruelty, and the sisters enjoyed every moment. Yet through it all, the human stood, silent, unmoving, his eyes never breaking, his chains never dragging him to the floor. The king watched, his expression unreadable, his golden gaze flicking between his daughters and the human. Some thought he was amused, others thought he was angry. But no one truly knew. The sisters, blinded by their arrogance, believed their father allowed this as entertainment. They thought the human was nothing but a joke, a piece of dust in the middle of their galaxy. The eldest sister leaned in once more, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Tell us, human, what do you dream of? To be free, to be strong, to be equal to us? No, such things are beyond your kind. You are born to serve." "Born to break," the second sister laughed again, her voice sharp as glass. "Perhaps we should let you speak, but only so the court can hear the sound of weakness. Let the galaxy remember the broken voice of Earth's child." The youngest, bold and cruel, stepped forward and whispered into his ear, "You should thank us, human, for even speaking to you, for in our world, creatures like you are not worth a word, only a whip." The human's silence was no longer just silence. It was resistance. It made the sisters restless. It made the crowd uneasy, because silence can be stronger than words. Silence can cut deeper than mockery, and in that silence, the human's eyes spoke louder than the laughter around him. The king's fingers tapped his throne, each sound echoing through the hall. He leaned forward slightly, watching the play unfold. There was no fear in his eyes, only thought, only judgment, as if he was measuring something hidden, something no one else could see. The sisters did not stop, their voices rising like fire. They mocked his body, his world, his spirit. They painted humans as broken, as useless, as dirt beneath their feet. And yet the human never bent, never bowed, never begged. The crowd, once full of laughter, began to shift. Some aliens whispered among themselves. "Why does he not speak?" one asked. "Why does he not fall?" another wondered. Even in their mocking, doubt began to slip into their voices. But the sisters did not see it. They were too blinded by their pride. They thought they were winning. They thought their words had crushed the human, but the truth was different. The truth was rising like a storm behind silent eyes, and the king, who had seen countless warriors and endless battles, could sense it. He leaned back in his throne, a faint smile touching his lips. The human was not broken. The human was waiting, and soon the sisters would learn that their laughter had only built the path toward their own humiliation. The court grew quiet again, the storm of mockery fading into uneasy silence. The air turned heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The human lifted his head higher, and his eyes burned with something the sisters could not understand, something stronger than muscle, sharper than steel. It was the spirit of humanity, silent, unyielding, waiting to strike. The laughter of the sisters faded slowly, leaving behind an echo that felt hollow. The human still stood in the center of the hall, chained yet unbroken. His silence had unsettled some of the crowd, though the sisters still wore proud smiles. They believed the show was over, that the human was fully shamed. But then the king rose from his throne. The sound of his armor shifting filled the hall. Heavy and sharp, the crowd fell silent instantly. Heads bowing, eyes lowering, even the sisters stiffened, though their pride refused to bend. The king stepped down from his throne, each footstep echoing like thunder. He moved until he stood before the human, their eyes level despite the chains. For the first time, the king spoke directly to him. "Tell me, human," he said, his deep voice carrying across the chamber. "What is courage to your kind?" The hall grew still. The sisters exchanged puzzled looks. Why would their father ask such a question? Why give value to the words of a weak creature? The human lifted his head, his calm eyes fixed on the king. His voice, when it came, was steady, low, but clear enough for all to hear. "Courage," he said, "is not the absence of fear. Courage is standing even when fear wants you to kneel." The words rolled through the hall like a whisper of fire. Some of the crowd shifted uncomfortably, surprised by the calm strength in his voice. The eldest sister scoffed loudly, her sharp voice breaking the silence. "Empty words, father, pretty sounds from a weak throat." Nothing more, but the king ignored her, his eyes never leaving the human. "And what is survival to your people?" the king asked again, his voice heavy. The human's lips curled slightly, not in a smile, but in quiet truth. "Survival," he said, "is not about strength alone. It is about refusing to give up. No matter the pain, no matter the loss, as long as one breath remains. Survival is ours." This time the whispers in the court grew louder. The aliens looked at each other, uncertain. These were not the words of a broken creature. These were the words of someone who carried fire inside. The sisters' smiles faded slightly, though they tried to keep mocking. The second sister stepped forward, her voice sharp with anger. "He lies, father. These are just stories. Humans hide behind words because they have no true power. But even as she spoke, doubt flickered in her golden eyes. For the human did not tremble, did not bow. His voice had carried a weight she could not ignore. The king raised his hand, silencing her. He turned back to the human, his expression unreadable. "And what is war to your kind?" the king asked. His tone deep and final. The human's eyes narrowed slightly. His voice grew firmer. "War," he said, "is not glory. Not pride, not victory. War is sacrifice. War is pain. War is everything you are willing to lose so others may live." The hall froze in silence. Not even the sisters spoke, their mocking voices caught in their throats. For the first time, the court saw something beyond the chains. Beyond the fragile body, they saw the weight of countless generations carried in his words. They saw the truth of a race that had bled, fought, and risen again and again. The king's golden eyes gleamed, his faint smile now clear. He turned to the court and raised his hand. "Do you hear him?" The king's voice thundered. "This is the spirit of a human, fragile in body." But unbroken in will, the crowd shifted. Some nodding, some whispering, some frowning in confusion. The sisters felt their pride shake, though they tried to hold it strong. The youngest sister hissed under her breath, "He is nothing but a man. How can father look at him with respect?" But the king ignored them all. His focus remained on the human. He stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "You are chained, yet you speak as if free." "Why?" the king asked. The human's eyes burned like quiet fire. His voice steady, "Because chains can hold the body, but they cannot hold the will." A heavy silence followed. The hall seemed to tremble with the weight of those words. The crowd of aliens, once so sure of their superiority, now shifted in doubt. The sisters, once so proud, felt anger boiling within them, for every word the human spoke was like a blade cutting into their pride. The eldest sister tried to laugh again, but her voice cracked slightly. She pointed at him with shaking fingers. "He thinks he is clever, but words cannot win battles. Words cannot change what he is." But even as she spoke, her voice no longer carried the same strength. The king turned slowly to face his daughters. "You mock him because you see weakness," he said, his tone heavy as stone. "But I see strength that cannot be measured by muscle. I see a spirit that no chain can break." The sisters fell silent, their faces pale with confusion and anger. The crowd bowed their heads, whispering among themselves. Something was changing in the hall, a shift none could deny. The mockery that had filled the air now tasted bitter. The human had not shouted, had not fought. Yet his presence had shaken the pride of a royal court. The king looked back at him one last time. His golden eyes gleamed, and his voice thundered across the chamber. "The galaxy has underestimated your kind for too long," he declared. And in that moment, the twist had begun. For the human who once stood as a prisoner, now stood as something far greater in the eyes of the king. The king's voice rolled through the great hall like thunder. Every alien in the chamber lowered their heads, but their eyes darted in secret, staring at the human who still stood tall despite the chains. The three sisters trembled with silent anger, though their pride refused to let their faces show it. They could not understand why their father gave this weak creature such importance. The eldest sister finally found her voice, sharp and cold. "Father, this is madness. He is just a human, a fragile being, not worthy of your words." The king's golden eyes turned toward her. Burning with quiet fire, "Silence," he commanded. And the word itself made the hall shake. The eldest sister lowered her head, though anger boiled in her chest like fire. The king raised his hand, and the hall grew even more silent. His voice came slowly, carefully, but filled with power. "You laugh at him, you mock him, but you do not understand him. And so you will learn, The sisters exchanged uneasy glances. Their arrogance shaken but not broken, the crowd leaned forward. Sensing something great was about to happen, the human himself stood calm, though his eyes narrowed as if waiting for a storm. The king's gaze swept across the chamber before settling on his daughters once more. "My order is final," he declared, his tone sharp as steel. "You three will marry this human." The words struck the hall like lightning. Gasps filled the air. The crowd erupted in shock. The sisters' proud faces cracked into disbelief. They stared at their father as if they had not heard him clearly. The youngest sister was the first to cry out, "No, father, you cannot mean this. You would force us, daughters of the crown, to bind ourselves to such a creature." Her voice shook with anger, her hands clenched tight. But the king's expression did not change, his eyes cold as stone. The second sister stepped forward, her voice fierce. "This is shame. Father, you dishonor us. You dishonor our people. How can we, of royal blood, be tied to a weak and pitiful human?" Her words carried across the hall. But they only sounded like desperation. The court, still buzzing with shock, fell silent again to hear the king's reply. The king raised his head, his voice booming. "You call it shame, but I call it wisdom. You see weakness in him, but I see strength. Strength your eyes are too blind to see." The eldest sister's pride flared once more. Her voice cracked with rage as she shouted, "Father, we are warriors. We are royalty. How can you lower us to such a fate? This man has no armies, no throne, no crown." The king's voice cut her words in half. "He has something greater. He has will." The chamber shook with the weight of his tone. The king stepped closer to the human, his hand pointing at him. "Look at him, chained yet unbroken, mocked yet silent. Weak in flesh but unyielding in spirit. This is what true power looks like." The court whispered in awe. Their voices low, some began to nod. Understanding the king's words, others remained stunned, unable to believe what they had heard, but no one dared to challenge the king. The sisters, however, were not silent. The youngest cried out again, her golden eyes burning with fury. "Father, we will not obey this. We'll not tie ourselves to something so beneath us." The king's gaze snapped to her like a blade. "You will obey," he thundered, his voice shaking the very pillars of the hall. "You are my daughters, heirs of my blood. And you will learn that pride without wisdom is nothing but weakness." The sisters froze, their bodies trembling with anger, but their father's command was unbreakable. The court bowed lower, no one daring to raise their heads. Even the guards tightened their grips on their spears. Sensing the weight of the king's judgment, the human finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, but carrying strength. "I did not ask for this," he said, his eyes fixed on the king. "I do not seek to rule your daughters, nor to claim honor through them." His words surprised the court, for they expected him to gloat, to boast, but he remained humble. "I only stand as I am, nothing more, nothing less." The king nodded slowly, his golden eyes gleaming. "And that is why you are worthy," he replied, "for you do not seek power. Yet power finds its way to you. You do not chase glory. Yet glory follows those who do not break." The sisters clenched their teeth, their anger hotter than fire, but deep inside. A seed of doubt had been planted, for no matter how much they mocked him, the human had not bent, and now their father had race. At him higher than they could bear. The king turned to the court, his voice rising like a storm. "Let it be known. This human stands as more than a prisoner. He stands as a lesson to all who believe strength is only in muscle and blood." The words carried across the hall, into the hearts of every alien present. Some lowered their heads in respect, others in fear. But none could deny the truth they had seen. The sisters' mocking laughter had turned into silence. Their proud smiles shattered by their father's command. And the human, once the target of scorn, now stood at the center of fate. The order had been given, the path had been chosen, and nothing in the galaxy could turn it back. The order had been given. And the echo of the king's words still thundered through the great hall. The three alien sisters stood frozen, their faces pale with disbelief. Their proud hearts torn between fury and humiliation. The crowd murmured in shock, some too afraid to lift their heads. Others whispering about the strange strength of the human. The chains still bound his wrists, yet in that moment, it felt as if he was the only free one in the chamber. The eldest sister broke the silence first, her voice sharp with rage. "This cannot be, Father. You dishonor us and our people by tying us to this creature." Her words shook with fury, but also with fear, for she felt something in the human that she could not name. The second sister's voice followed. "Bitter and cold, he has no armies, no weapons, no throne. How can he be worthy of us?" The king did not answer them. His golden eyes fixed on the human instead. The human raised his head slowly. And for the first time since he entered the hall, he spoke not with calm silence, but with fire in his voice. "You see chains," he said. His voice steady, "But I see freedom. You see weakness, but I see strength. You see nothing in me, but I carry everything of my kind." The hall fell into silence again, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to hear his words. The human's voice grew stronger, sharper, filled with the weight of countless struggles. "You mock me because I am small, because I bleed, because my body can break. But that is not what makes us human. What makes us human is the will to rise after we fall, to fight when hope is gone, to stand when the world demands we kneel." The crowd shifted uneasily, their whispers turning into silence. The sisters' mocking smiles were gone, their eyes wide, their hearts struck by something they could not laugh at. The youngest sister hissed, her voice low and shaken. Empty words. Nothing more, but even she did not believe her own voice. The human lifted his chained hands, the metal clinking loudly in the silent hall. "These chains are nothing," he said, "because no chain can bind the spirit of humanity. You think you are greater because of strength, because of power, but you do not understand. Our strength is not in muscle or blade. It is in refusing to give up. It is in fighting until the last breath. It is in standing when all others fall." The king's golden eyes gleamed brighter, his voice rising to meet the humans. "Speak, human. Let them hear the truth of your kind." The human's voice grew louder, sharper, unshaken. "Your people fear death. They fear loss. They fear weakness. But humans do not. We carry death as a shadow. Yet we move forward. We carry loss in our hearts, yet we rise. We carry weakness in our flesh, yet we make it strength. This is why you cannot break us," the court gasped. Their pride wounded by his words, yet their hearts could not deny the truth. Images of Earth's history seemed to burn behind his words. Wars survived. Storms endured, endless scars, yet always rising again. The eldest sister clenched her fists, her anger shaking but her fear growing. She whispered, almost to herself, "This is why Father chose him." The king raised his hand, his deep voice shaking the chamber. "Do you see now, my daughters? Do you understand? This is the truth of humanity. Their spirit burns brighter than any crown, sharper than any sword, fiercer than any army." The sisters lowered their eyes, their pride cracked, their laughter gone. They had mocked him once, but now they felt something new, not respect. Not yet, but fear. Fear of a creature they had once called weak. Fear of the strength that came not from flesh, but from will. The human lowered his chained hands again. His voice calm now, but filled with power. I did not come here to be worshipped. I did not come here to be feared. I only came as myself, and that is enough, for a human does not need to be stronger than others. He only needs the will to never break. The crowd bowed their heads in silence. Some in awe, some in fear, some in quiet respect. The king's smile grew faint but proud. He had seen countless warriors, countless kings, countless conquerors, but in the chained human before him, he saw something greater. The sisters could not speak. Their pride shattered, their hearts heavy. For the human they had mocked, laughed at, and scorned had now risen higher than their voices. The court would remember this day. The day when a human stood in chains, yet broke the pride of an empire. The king raised his hand, one final time. His voice like thunder, let the galaxy know this truth. Humans are not weak, they are unbreakable. And no crown, no throne, no blade can silence them. The hall trembled with the echo of his words, and the human, silent once more, stood taller than ever, for though he was chained, in that moment he was free. And the three sisters who once mocked him now looked at him with silence, for they knew. The human was no longer their shame, he was their fate. The great hall remained silent long after the king's words. The alien court, once filled with mocking laughter, now sat in uneasy quiet. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. All eyes remained fixed on the chained human who had stood against them all. He had spoken few words, but those words had cut deeper than blades. The three sisters stood close together, their proud faces pale, their eyes lowered for the first time. They could not laugh, they could not mock. Their voices were stolen by the weight of truth. They had mocked the human for weakness, but now they felt something else inside their hearts. It was not respect yet, but it was fear, and fear was the first step toward understanding. The king turned to the court, his golden armor shining like fire. "Let this day be remembered," he said, his voice carrying across the galaxy in the ears of his people. "Strength is not only in blood, not only in bone, not only in muscle. Strength lives in will, and in this human, I have seen the strongest will of all." The guards lowered their heads. The nobles bowed. The crowd of aliens could not deny the truth. They had seen it with their own eyes. A creature they had thought fragile had stood taller than their proudest warriors. A prisoner in chains had carried the weight of 1,000 victories in silence. The eldest sister finally raised her voice, soft but trembling. "Father, what lesson do you wish for us to learn from this?" Her arrogance was gone. Her words uncertain. The king's eyes turned to her, and his voice came sharp but steady. "To see beyond what your eyes show. To understand that pride without wisdom is weakness. To know that true power is not always visible." The second sister clenched her hands, her golden eyes burning with quiet confusion. "Why humans, father? Why raise them so high?" she asked. The king's voice rumbled like thunder, "Because the galaxy has always mistaken fragility for weakness. But fragility can hide the strongest fire. A fire that refuses to die." The youngest sister said nothing. Her eyes locked on the human. She remembered how she had pushed him, how he had stumbled but never fallen. That moment now burned in her mind, for she understood. Even a stumble could be strength. When one refuses to fall, the human lowered his head, his voice calm once more. "I did not come here to change your world," he said. "I only came as myself, chained and mocked, but still human. And that is enough." His words carried softly, but they filled the hall with quiet power. For the truth of his spirit could no longer be denied. The king lifted his hand, and the guards removed the chains. The sound of the metal hitting the floor rang out like the breaking of old lies. The human rubbed his wrists, but his eyes never wavered. He stood taller than ever before. His spirit unchained at last, the court whispered in awe. Some in fear, some in quiet respect. The sisters stood in silence. Their pride shattered, but their hearts unsettled with questions they had never asked before. What was this strength that needed no throne, no crown, no army? What was this power that turned silence into fire and chains into nothing? The king looked at his daughters once more. His voice sharp. "You will learn," he said, "and you will understand. For the fate I have given you is not punishment. It is wisdom. It is the path to see what you could not before." The sisters lowered their heads, for they could not disobey, but deep inside, their hearts trembled with a strange new feeling they could not name. The human looked around the hall, his eyes calm but burning with fire. He saw their pride, their fear, their doubt. And he knew this was only the beginning. He had not won a battle with swords. He had not crushed them with strength. Yet in silence, in chains, in words, he had shaken an empire. The king stepped back to his throne, his voice ringing out one final time. Let the galaxy remember this day. The day a human stood unbroken in the face of power. The day pride was humbled by will. The crowd bowed. The sisters remained silent, and the humans stood free. The hall trembled, not with laughter now, but with the weight of history. The story would spread across the stars. Some would laugh, some would fear, some would respect. But none would forget that 3 alien sisters had mocked a human, and that a king had ordered them to bind their fate to him. For in the end, the greatest chain was not iron, but destiny. And destiny had chosen the human. The days after the king's command were heavy with silence. The alien palace, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now carried whispers that spread like fire. The story of the human had escaped the walls of the court, traveling across the empire. Every planet under the king's rule now spoke of the fragile creature who stood unbroken before the throne. The 3 sisters found no rest. Their pride had been wounded, their voices stolen by their father's order. Where once they had walked with arrogance, now the people looked at them with new eyes. They were no longer remembered for their beauty or their sharp words. They were remembered as the sisters who mocked a human and were humbled. The eldest sister sat in her chamber, her silver eyes filled with storms. She whispered to herself again and again, how could he stand so calm? How could he speak with such strength when he was nothing? Her pride tried to reject it. But her heart could not forget. The image of the human standing tall in chains haunted her dreams. The second sister walked the training grounds, striking blade against blade. She told herself she was stronger, faster, greater. Yet in every swing she saw his face, his calm defiance, and her strikes grew weaker. Her heart heavier, for she realized no matter how sharp her weapon, it could not cut through the silence he had carried. The youngest sister was the most troubled. She had pushed him once, expecting him to fall, but he had not. That moment burned in her heart like fire every time she closed her eyes. She remembered it, and for the first time, she asked herself a question she had never dared before. What if true strength is not what I thought it was? The human, meanwhile, was given freedom within the palace. No longer chained, he walked the halls with quiet steps. The guards bowed to him. The nobles whispered as he passed. Some called him dangerous, others called him chosen. But all of them remembered the fire in his words. He did not boast, he did not claim victory. He only lived as he always had, simple, steady, unbroken. Yet his presence was like a storm hidden in the air. The more the aliens looked at him, the more they understood why the king had chosen him. The king himself watched closely, his golden eyes always studying. He saw his daughters wrestle with their pride. He saw his people wrestle with their doubt. But most of all, he saw the human change nothing and yet change everything. This, he thought, was the true lesson of humanity. To shift the world not by force, but by spirit. One evening, the king gathered the court again. The sisters stood beside him, silent, their eyes lowered. The human stood before them, calm and still as always. The king rose and his voice thundered across the hall. Today, you see a truth that cannot be denied. A truth that will shape the fate of our empire. He turned to his daughters. His voice sharp, you will walk beside him. Not as rulers over him, but as those who learn from him. For his spirit is greater than your pride. The sisters bowed their heads, their pride still wounded. But their hearts now carrying seeds of change, the crowd murmured. But none dared to challenge the king's words. The human spoke softly, his voice carrying across the chamber. I do not seek crowns, I do not seek thrones. I seek only to live as I am, human, nothing more. Nothing less, yet his words shook the court more than any roar. For they understood now that his power lay not in seeking, but in simply being from that day forward. The empire watched closely. The sisters walked beside the human, sometimes in silence, sometimes in anger. Sometimes in questions they had never asked before, and slowly they began to see that what they once mocked was the very thing they lacked. The will to stand, even when the world demanded they kneel. The galaxy whispered, stories spread from world to world. Some called him the king's fool, some called him the king's test. But others called him something far greater. They called him unbreakable, they called him human. And though the story seemed to end, it did not. For fate is a chain stronger than iron, and destiny had only just begun weaving its threads. The sisters who mocked him would carry his shadow forever. The king who raised him would shape a new future. And the human who once stood alone in chains now stood at the heart of an empire. The hall that had once shaken with cruel laughter now carried a new silence. Not the silence of mockery, but the silence of respect. For all who entered remembered the day when three sisters mocked a man, and the day when a king gave them their fate. The galaxy would never forget, and neither would the sisters. For the human they scorned had become their destiny. And destiny, once chosen, cannot be broken.